The crystalline halls of the Galactic Concordat's central chamber glittered like 1,000 frozen stars, but Commander Arya Blake felt anything but dazzled. Standing before the Council of 12, representatives of the most advanced civilizations in known space, she fought to keep her expression neutral as the Supreme Arbiter's words echoed through the vast chamber. By decree of the late Empress Celestia of the Australian Empire, guardianship of Princess Lunara shall pass to Commander Arya Blake of Earth. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates from 100 worlds launched into outraged protests. A Valerian senator, his plasma-based form crackling with indignation, rose from his containment field. This is preposterous. Entrust an Australian royal to a species that hasn't even mastered antimatter containment? Arya's hand instinctively touched the worn leather strap of her grandfather's watch on her wrist, a habit from childhood that surfaced whenever she needed strength. Her dark eyes scanned the chamber, taking in the sneers and dismissive glances from beings that considered her species little more than clever apes. But then she saw her. Princess Lunara floated in a special containment field at the chamber's heart, a being of pure stellar energy, her form shifting between states of plasma and light. Unlike the stable energy forms of mature Australians, Lunara's essence pulsed erratically, threatening to destabilize at any moment. The young princess's light dimmed with each harsh word from the council members, her fear palpable even through the containment field. I accept the guardianship, Arya's voice cut through the chaos, steady and clear. The chamber fell silent, more from shock than respect. Supreme Arbiter Xylith, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns that indicated surprise, leaned forward. Commander Blake, you do understand what this entails. Princess Lunara's energy form is highly unstable. The last 3 guardians, all from advanced energy-based civilizations, failed to help her achieve stability. 2 nearly died in the attempt. Arya stepped forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor. With respect, Arbiter, perhaps that's exactly why Empress Celestia chose a human. We've spent our entire history learning to adapt, to understand things beyond our immediate comprehension. Where others see instability, we see potential. A low murmur rippled through the chamber. Arya continued, her voice growing stronger. Humanity didn't achieve space flight by giving up when things seemed impossible. We didn't cure our worst diseases by accepting limitations. We succeeded because we learned to see problems differently. She walked closer to Lunara's containment field, noting how the princess's energy patterns seemed to calm slightly at her approach. Your civilizations master energy through technology and innate ability. We humans master it through understanding, through trial and error, through connecting with it on levels you might consider primitive but are no less valid. The young princess's light pulsed in a pattern Arya recognized as curiosity. She'd studied Australian energy languages extensively during her diplomatic training. Arya smiled, addressing Lunara directly. Your mother saw something in humanity, in me. I don't intend to let either of you down. Supreme Arbiter Xylith's crystalline form shifted colors rapidly, their species equivalent of a deep sigh. The law is clear. The Empress's will must be respected. Commander Blake, you are hereby appointed guardian of Princess Lunara. May the stars grant you wisdom and survival. As the chamber slowly emptied, delegates still muttering about the foolishness of trusting a human with such responsibility, Arya approached Lunara's containment field. The princess's energy form twisted into patterns that Arya recognized as a mixture of hope and fear. Hello, princess, Arya said softly. I know everyone expects me to fail. But I promise you this, I will never give up on you, never run away when things get difficult, and never treat your differences as something to be feared. On Earth, we have a saying, the darkest nights produce the brightest stars. Together, we are going to show them just how bright you can shine. Lunara's energy form pulsed with a new pattern, one that Arya had never seen in any diplomatic briefing or xenobiology text. It took her a moment to realize what it was: trust. The human and the Starchild faced each other in the empty chamber, while above them, through the transparent dome, the galaxies spun on, unaware that this unlikely partnership was about to change everything. The laboratory aboard the Earth Embassy Station wasn't designed for containing a being of pure stellar energy, but Commander Arya Blake had always been good at improvisation. She'd transformed the space into something that looked more like a dance studio than a lab: open space, reinforced energy barriers that could adjust to Lunara's fluctuating energy levels, and most importantly, walls lined with sensors that could track every nuance of the princess's energy patterns. Try it again, Arya encouraged, watching as Lunara attempted to maintain a stable spherical form. Remember, don't fight the fluctuations, work with them, like waves in an ocean. The princess's energy form pulsed with frustration as she once again failed to maintain the shape for more than a few seconds. Her light dimmed, a sign that Arya had learned meant disappointment. You know, Arya said, pulling up a holographic display of Earth's sun, our star goes through cycles too. Solar flares, coronal mass ejections, what might look like instability to some is actually part of a greater pattern. She manipulated the display to show the complex magnetic fields that shaped solar activity. Beauty isn't about perfect stability. It's about finding harmony in the chaos. A soft chime interrupted them, the lab's door sliding open to reveal High Chancellor Varix of the Australian court, his energy form a perfect, unwavering sphere of white light. I see the humans' primitive methods are achieving their expected results, he observed coldly, noting Lunara's unstable form. Arya straightened, keeping her voice level despite her rising irritation. We're making progress, Chancellor. Just not in the way you might expect. Progress? Varix's tone dripped with disdain. The princess cannot even maintain basic geometric forms. At her age, any proper Australian noble should have mastered at least 7 dimensions of energy manipulation. Lunara's form flickered rapidly, shame and anger creating dangerous spikes in her energy readings. The lab's sensors blared warnings as her containment field struggled to adapt. But Arya didn't retreat. Instead, she walked closer to Lunara's field, her voice soft but firm. Show him your dance, princess. The chamber grew quiet as Lunara's energy began to move. At first, it seemed chaotic, waves and spirals of light spinning in apparently random patterns. But then, as the movement continued, something extraordinary emerged. The apparently random fluctuations began creating complex, three-dimensional patterns that rippled through space like auroras. Arya smiled, gesturing to the sensor readings. What you see as instability, Chancellor, we've discovered is actually an incredible gift. Lunara isn't failing to conform to traditional Australian energy patterns, she's creating entirely new ones. She pulled up comparison data showing standard Australian energy signatures alongside Lunara's unique patterns. Traditional Australian energy manipulation focuses on perfect geometric forms, yes. But Lunara's energy naturally moves in fractals, patterns that repeat at different scales, like we see in Earth's weather systems, river networks, or the growth patterns of crystals. The princess's light brightened as she continued her dance, gaining confidence. The patterns she created became even more complex, filling the chamber with shifting mandalas of light that seemed to bend space itself. Impossible, Varix whispered, his own perfect spherical form wavering slightly. Impossible? Arya's eyes sparkled. Or just something beyond traditional understanding? Humans learned long ago that sometimes the most beautiful discoveries come from embracing what others call impossible. She activated another display, showing how Lunara's fractal patterns actually created more stable energy configurations than traditional Australian forms, even if they appeared more chaotic on the surface. By working with her natural tendencies instead of against them, we've discovered that the princess can achieve effects no other Australian has ever managed. Lunara's dance reached its crescendo, her energy forming a complex network of interconnected patterns that filled the chamber with rainbow light. For a moment, even the cynical chancellor seemed mesmerized. But then his form snapped back to its rigid sphere. The court will not be impressed by pretty light shows, Commander. The princess must learn proper control, or she will never take her place among the Australian nobility. As he turned to leave, Arya called after him. You know, Chancellor, on Earth we have a saying, those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those who are doing it. After Varix departed, Lunara's form settled into a gently pulsing pattern that Arya had come to recognize as her equivalent of a smile. The princess had learned to communicate through subtle variations in her energy patterns, and right now she was radiating gratitude. Don't thank me yet, Arya said, already pulling up new data on her screens. We've just proven that your instability is actually a form of advanced energy manipulation. Now we need to understand exactly how it works. She grinned. Ready to do some science? Lunara's response was to create a perfect miniature replica of Earth's solar system in dancing light, each planet's orbit described by her fractal patterns. Arya laughed. The princess was learning not just control, but style. As they worked late into the station's artificial night, Arya couldn't help but wonder if this was what Empress Celestia had foreseen, not just a human teaching an Australian, but two different species learning from each other, discovering that what looked like chaos from one perspective could be the most perfect order from another. But in the shadows of the station's corridors, Chancellor Varix was already composing a message to certain members of the Australian court. The humans' progress with the princess was becoming more than just an embarrassment, it was becoming dangerous to the established order. Something would have to be done. The attempt on Lunara's life came during what should have been a routine energy stabilization exercise. One moment, the princess was practicing her fractal patterns under Arya's watchful eye. The next, a surge of dark energy ripped through the lab's containment fields, threatening to destabilize Lunara's entire form. Arya's fingers flew across the control panel, trying to counter the attack, but whoever had designed this weapon knew exactly how to target an Australian's energy matrix. She watched in horror as Lunara's bright form began to dim and fragment. Stay with me, princess. Arya's mind raced through everything she knew about energy physics, about Australian physiology, about the nature of light itself. Then, in a moment of desperate inspiration, she did something no previous guardian would have considered. She dropped all the containment fields. The lab's AI blared warnings, but Arya ignored them. Lunara, remember the fractal dance. Your patterns are stronger than any single form, use them. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Lunara's dispersing energy began to move in the familiar waves and spirals they'd practiced. The dark energy tried to disrupt her pattern, but each time it broke one connection, Lunara's fractal nature created two more. Like a river finding new paths around obstacles, her light flowed and adapted. That's it. Arya encouraged, even as she frantically worked to trace the attack's source. They expect you to fight force with force. Show them what we've learned about finding strength in flexibility. The princess's light grew stronger, her fractal patterns spinning faster until they created a complex, ever-shifting shield that the dark energy couldn't penetrate. When the attack finally faded, Lunara was not only intact but glowing brighter than ever. Initial analysis complete, the lab's AI announced. Attack originated from within the Australian diplomatic quarters. Arya's jaw tightened. They'd known there would be opposition to her guardianship, but an assassination attempt. This was something else entirely. Save all sensor data, she ordered. And initialize protocol Eclipse. Later that night, in a secure room deep within the Earth Embassy, Arya met with her most trusted ally, Dr. Arvinan Talis, a quantum physicist and one of the few non-humans who had supported her guardianship of Lunara. The Meridian scientists' bioluminescent markings pulsed with concern as they reviewed the attack data. This wasn't just about removing a problematic princess. Arvinan's four eyes narrowed at the energy signatures. This weapon was designed to harvest Lunara's power in the moment of destabilization. Someone wants to weaponize her abilities. But why? Arya paced the room, her grandfather's watch a comforting weight on her wrist. Australians already have incredible energy manipulation abilities. Traditional abilities, yes. Arvinan brought up a hologram of Lunara's fractal patterns. But what you and the princes have discovered is something new. These adaptive patterns, they could revolutionize everything from space travel to energy production. In the wrong hands. They could also revolutionize weapons technology, Arya finished grimly. No wonder some people want us to fail. We are not just challenging social prejudices, we are threatening the balance of power. A soft pulse of light announced Lunara's arrival. The princess had insisted on joining their investigation, her form now stable enough to travel short distances without containment fields. Her patterns shifted into a question mark shape, her way of asking what they'd discovered. We have good news and bad news, Arya explained. The good news is that you are stronger than our enemies realized. The bad news is that they're not going to stop trying. Lunara's response was to create a complex series of interconnected fractals that Arya recognized as a map of the station's diplomatic quarter. The princess had been doing her own investigation. Clever girl, Arya smiled. You've been tracking energy signatures, haven't you? The patterns shifted, highlighting several locations where trace amounts of dark energy matched the signature of the weapon used against her. A trail of breadcrumbs leading right to the Australian Royal Archives. Arvinan's markings flashed with surprise. But only the highest-ranking nobles have access to that section of the station. And now we know why Chancellor Varix was so interested in Lunara's progress. Arya's expression hardened. He wasn't monitoring her development, he was assessing her potential as a weapon. Lunara's light dimmed momentarily, but then flared with determination. Her patterns formed a complex sequence that took Arya a moment to interpret. When she did, she couldn't help but smile. Are you sure, Princess? What you are suggesting is technically treason. The princess responded by creating a perfect replica of the Earth Embassy's seal in dancing light, followed by the ancient symbol of the Australian throne. Not treason, her patterns seemed to say, but loyalty to something greater than mere politics. She's right, Arvayanan noted. If there's a conspiracy within the Australian nobility to weaponize royal energy abilities, exposing it isn't treason, it's protecting the empire itself. Arya nodded, already formulating a plan. Then we'll need to gather evidence. But we'll have to be careful. One wrong move, and they'll do worse than try to destabilize Lunara. They'll use diplomatic law to separate us permanently. The princess's response was to create a series of interconnected patterns between herself and Arya, a beautiful demonstration of the bond they'd formed. Let them try, the patterns seemed to say. Some connections can't be broken by mere laws. As they began planning their investigation, Arya felt a familiar mix of pride and concern. They were about to challenge some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. But looking at Lunara, seeing how her once chaotic energy now moved with purposeful grace, Arya knew they would succeed. After all, they had something their enemies didn't understand, the power of two very different beings working in harmony, each making the other stronger. And if there was one thing humans had learned over their long history, it was that nothing was more powerful than unity born of understanding and trust. The Galactic Concordate's central archive was supposed to be impenetrable. Its quantum-encrypted systems and psychic barriers were designed to resist the most sophisticated hacking attempts in known space. But as Commander Arya Blake had learned long ago, sometimes the best way through a wall wasn't to break it, it was to make it want to let you in. "Ready, princess?" Arya whispered, checking the small device disguised as a data pad on her wrist. Around them, the archive's crystalline columns pulsed with security scanners. Lunara's response was to dim her light to almost nothing, making her energy signature nearly identical to the ambient power fluctuations of the archive itself. They'd spent weeks practicing this technique, not fighting against the princess's natural instability, but using it to mimic other energy patterns. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Arya distracted the archive's AI with a perfectly legitimate research request about Earth-Australian diplomatic history, Lunara would slip through the security grid by essentially becoming part of it. The princess's fractal patterns would allow her to spread through the archive's energy systems like light through a prism, gathering the evidence they needed. But just as they were about to begin, a familiar voice froze them in place. "Fascinating approach, Commander." Supreme Arbiter Xylith emerged from between the archive columns, their crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. Though perhaps not as subtle as you believe. Arya's hand instinctively moved to her grandfather's watch, ready to trigger the emergency evacuation protocol they'd prepared. But Lunara did something unexpected. She expanded her energy field to include the Supreme Arbiter in one of her fractal patterns. The ancient being's crystalline surface flickered with surprise. "Extraordinary," they whispered. "You are not just mimicking energy patterns, you are creating a harmonic resonance between different forms of existence." "That's what we've been trying to tell everyone," Arya said carefully, still ready to run if needed. Lunara's instability isn't a weakness, it's a gift. She can bridge forms of energy that most consider incompatible. Much like how humanity bridges technologies and cultures that others believe cannot coexist. The Supreme Arbiter's tone held something Arya had never heard before: respect. "Perhaps that is why Empress Celestia chose you, Commander." She foresaw not just a guardian for her daughter, but a partnership that could change how we understand the very nature of energy and existence. Lunara's patterns shifted questioningly. Arya translated, "You knew about the weapon research in the Royal Archives?" "I suspected." Xylith's form dimmed slightly. "But suspicion is not proof, and the Australian nobility's influence runs deep. I needed someone outside the traditional power structures to investigate, someone who would approach the problem differently." "So you've been watching us this whole time," Arya realized. "Waiting to see if we'd figure it out. And you have exceeded all expectations." The Supreme Arbiter moved to one of the archive's main interfaces. "Which is why I am here to help you gather the evidence you need legally and officially." Over the next few hours, with Xylith's security clearance and Lunara's unique abilities, they uncovered the full scope of the conspiracy. Chancellor Varix and his allies hadn't just been researching weapons, they had been systematically suppressing information about alternative forms of energy manipulation for generations, keeping the Australian Empire locked in rigid traditions that served their power. "Look at this," Arya pointed to an ancient text they'd discovered. Early Australian history talks about star dancers, beings who could shape energy in fluid, adaptive patterns. They weren't considered unstable, they were celebrated as artists and innovators. Lunara's light brightened with each new discovery. Her patterns weren't a flaw, they were a reemergence of an ancient and powerful art form that had been deliberately erased from history. The question now, Xylith noted, is how to present this evidence to the Galactic Council in a way that cannot be dismissed or suppressed. Arya smiled, watching Lunara create a dancing replica of the ancient star dancer patterns. "I think it's time we gave them a demonstration they can't ignore." "Princess, remember that idea we discussed? About combining your fractal patterns with other forms of energy?" Lunara's response was to create a miniature version of what they'd been practicing in secret, a harmony of light, crystal, and quantum energy that made even the Supreme Arbiter's ancient form vibrate in resonance. "If we do this," Arya cautioned, "there's no going back. We'll be challenging the fundamental power structure of one of the oldest empires in the galaxy." The princess's patterns formed a clear response, a perfect replica of Earth's moon reflecting the sun's light. "Even the smallest light," she seemed to say, "could change the darkness." "Very well." Xylith's crystalline form shimmered with anticipation. "I will call an emergency session of the Galactic Council. But be warned, Varix and his allies will not submit quietly to exposure. They will have prepared for this possibility." "Good." Arya checked the modifications she'd made to her grandfather's watch, now a quantum-linked emergency beacon. "So have we." As they left the archive, Arya felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. They weren't just fighting for Lunara's right to be herself, or for humanity's place among the stars. They were fighting for the right of all beings to evolve and grow beyond the limitations others placed on them. Tomorrow, they would either change the galaxy forever, or lose everything they'd worked for. But looking at Lunara, seeing how her light danced with confidence and purpose, Arya knew they'd already achieved something remarkable. They'd proven that the strongest bonds in the universe weren't formed by power or tradition, but by the willingness to see beauty in difference and strength in change. Now they just had to convince the rest of the galaxy to see it too. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so full. Representatives from every known civilization crowded the crystalline tiers, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of light, matter, and energy. At the chamber's center, Commander Arya Blake stood beside Princess Lunara, facing Chancellor Varix and his assemblage of Australian nobles. "This is an outrage," Varix's energy form pulsed with carefully controlled anger. "These accusations against the noble houses of Australia are based on nothing but human speculation and corrupted historical records." Supreme Arbiter Xylith's voice rang through the chamber. "The evidence gathered from the Royal Archives speaks for itself, Chancellor. Or do you deny the weapons research we discovered?" "Research?" Varix's form expanded impressively. "We study all applications of energy manipulation for the good of the Empire. Would you have us ignore potential advances in our understanding?" "Understanding?" Arya stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "You've been suppressing understanding. The Star Dancers weren't just an ancient art form, they were proof that Australian energy could be more dynamic, more adaptive than the rigid forms you enforce." She gestured to Lunara, whose light danced in increasingly complex patterns. "The princess isn't damaged or unstable. She's the rebirth of something you tried to erase because it threatened your control." Varix's response was devastating in its simplicity. "Pretty words, Commander. But can you prove any of this? Or should we simply take the word of a primitive species about matters they barely comprehend?" "Actually," Arya smiled, "we can prove it." "Princess?" Lunara's form began to expand, her fractal patterns spreading through the chamber like a web of living light. But instead of just creating beautiful displays, she did something unprecedented. She began to harmonize with the energy signatures of every being present. The chamber filled with gasps as each delegate felt their natural energy forms resonating with Lunara's patterns. Crystalline beings found their structures singing in harmony with plasma-based entities. Quantum fluctuations danced with electromagnetic fields. Every form of energy and matter in the room began to move together in a grand symphony of existence. "This is the truth you tried to hide," Arya announced, her voice carrying over the ethereal display. "Energy isn't meant to be controlled and contained. It's meant to flow, to adapt, to bring different forms together in harmony." But Varix wasn't finished. With a gesture, he activated hidden devices throughout the chamber. Dark energy began to pulse through the room, threatening to disrupt Lunara's patterns. Enough of this display. The princess must be contained for her own good and the good of the Empire. The attack was stronger than anything they'd faced before. Lunara's light began to flicker, her patterns starting to break apart. Delegates scrambled to protect themselves as waves of chaotic energy swept through the chamber. "Hold on, Princess." Arya reached out, her grandfather's watch glowing as it activated their final defense, a network of quantum resonators hidden throughout the station. "Remember what we learned. Your strength isn't in fighting the chaos. It's in embracing it." Lunara's voice rang through their minds for the first time, shocking everyone present. The princess's light surged, not fighting against the dark energy but incorporating it into her patterns, turning disruption into harmony. The chamber transformed into a spectacular display of energy physics that transcended known science. Lunara's fractal patterns didn't just resist Varix's weapons, they reformed them, turning destructive power into creative force. Where the dark energy touched her light, new patterns emerged, more beautiful and complex than before. "Impossible." Varix's perfect sphere began to crack as his weapons turned against him. "No Australian can manipulate energy this way." "No traditional Australian," Supreme Arbiter Xylith corrected, their crystalline form resonating with Lunara's patterns. But then, tradition isn't always the best measure of possibility. The chamber watched in awe as Lunara's consciousness touched each being present, sharing not just energy but understanding. Through her patterns, they felt what she and Arya had discovered, that true strength comes not from enforcing uniformity, but from finding harmony in diversity. When the light finally faded, Varix and his conspirators stood revealed, their perfect spherical forms now as unstable as they'd once claimed Lunara to be. The evidence of their crimes was written in the very energy they'd tried to control. The Council recognizes Princess Lunara of the Australian Empire, Xylith declared, not as a ward to be controlled, but as a pioneer of a new era in galactic cooperation. And we recognize humanity, represented by Commander Arya Blake, not as primitive outsiders, but as valuable allies who remind us that progress often comes from seeing beyond our preconceptions. Lunara's form settled into a gentle glow beside Arya, their energies naturally harmonizing in a way that seemed to embody everything they'd fought for. The princess's voice touched their minds again, sharing not words but a feeling of gratitude and hope. Arya touched her grandfather's watch, remembering all the times humanity had been dismissed as too primitive, too emotional, too chaotic to join the galactic community. You know, she said softly, on Earth we have another saying, the most beautiful light shows up best in the darkness. The princess responded by creating a pattern that combined the symbols of Earth and Australia, not separate but intertwined, showing how two very different worlds could make each other stronger. As the council chamber slowly emptied, delegates still buzzing with excitement about the implications of what they'd witnessed, Arya and Lunara remained in the center, their unlikely partnership now a symbol of everything possible when barriers of prejudice and tradition were replaced with understanding and trust. Above them, through the chamber's transparent dome, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if acknowledging that the galaxy had changed forever, not through force or technology, but through the simple power of seeing beauty in difference and strength in change.